Hello, welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm doing my 25.8 jungle tier list, so if you enjoy content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were only a couple of changes towards the jungle this patch. We saw a nerf towards Jork, who was blatantly overpowered in the previous patch. We saw a nerf towards Gwen, pretty minor, didn't really shift her a huge amount in the jungle. We saw some adjustments in the previous patch to Neferi as follow-up changes. Hasn't been directly touched in this patch, but has kind of reshifted in terms of where her win rate and expectations are. And then Brand received a direct buff. This is the second direct buff he's received for jungle. He's still underperforming at the moment. Not really a pick I'd recommend, but if they were to then follow up with some direct changes to Brand, maybe for his solo lane, I could definitely see Brand jungle coming back as an option if you're looking for an AP pick. Let's get into it. So the DT is going to consist of relatively similar champions. The likes of Skarner still pretty heavily underperform in solo queue at the moment. He's still a competitive mainstay, having access to a lot of CC tools and being able to work on a relatively low amount of income, so he can give resources to the rest of his team. He works really nicely there. He still does just underperform in solo queue. He is a relatively hard champion to pilot for a tank. A lot of the times these picks can be relatively easy as they have access to they can consistently not go for the optimal combos and still get rewarded by just being a meat shield. But in the case of Skarner, if you mess up and blunder his kit, he will be considerably less valuable, so he sits as a D-tier option at the moment. In the case of Maokai, he's also another competitive mainstay. Being able to work on low amounts of resources gives this champion a lot of value. He's got a very powerful ultimate, lots of CC tools. His clear is slow, but can be worked around as he still gets access to decent amount of damage through his Q jungle monster modifier. He's not a pick I'd recommend for solo queue, but if you enjoy playing him, he's not out of the pool by any means. He's just not he's just a relatively low agency pick compared to some of the other options accessible to you. In the case of Gragas, his pick has been pretty heavily underperforming in the jungle for a while. He feels like he's basically not even supported here as an option anymore. It is probably the worst of his four roles, with top being his best, competing with mid as an option, and then support, and then jungle being his least supported option. If you enjoy playing Gragas, you can still play him here. He just won't get you as consistent results as some of the other options, and if you're looking for a new AP jungler to kind of opt into, he's definitely the kind of pick I would not recommend at the moment. In the case of Silas, they made an effort back along to try and give him the ability to jungle once again. They removed the monster modifier reduction on his Q, all the way from 30 to 100%. It was nice at the time. I believe this was when Night Harvester was an option for him in the game, and even after that it was still these heavy burst orientated builds with the Storm Surge. But right now he currently suffers from needing to go some level of HP to make up for some of the damage loss which they kind of took out of his kit when they were trying to push him towards bruiser builds. And in the jungle you do just want AP to clear as quick as possible, and right now he's just not in a great spot. Probably one of the weaker options here, as he is just predicated on snowballing more than anything. Brand moves to the top of the D tier. This pick still has issues. It's still not a great jungle option at the moment, but this does put him back on the radar. The last set of changes were not enough. This set of changes have kind of push him back to the top of the D tier. If you are very comfortable playing him, you can get results. I don't think this champion is really horrible any means, and he does have more agency than some of the other picks in the D tier, but he is slightly separated from the other ones. I think he needs a bit more to really be a functional jungle pick again, but he is definitely no longer non-viable. He's just still on the weak side by a decent margin, if anything. The other two picks I've re-added are Morgana and Nasus. Both these picks sit towards the mid to high end of the D tier. I think they have better perks for average play. In the case of Morgana, she relies quite heavily on just being able to clear, and then people are sitting in your damage a lot of the time. If you can consistently just have targets on your W, you can output a decent amount of damage, especially when you opt into playing Morgana jungle. She needs a bit more to be viable again, but you can play her in certain compositions and get some level of value. In the case of Nasus, he's an incredibly low elo skewed pick. You just want to stack as much as you can when you're playing jungle Nasus, and he can get to some very egregious stack numbers, but it's pretty unrealistic. You will get invaded, and the higher up you go, the viability of this pick massively shoots down. Not a champion I would recommend playing, but if you are in this elo bracket, you can get results on this champion. He is not non-viable. He's just not that great as an option here. I'd say Brand probably sits as the front runner of the D tier. That being said, though, I've bumped Rengar and Nidalee back up out of the D tier. Actually, I'll leave Rengar at the top of the D tier. I'll leave Nidalee in the C tier. I think Rengar probably needs a bit more to kind of jump back up again. He's not the most performant in high-low at the moment. He's definitely been better in the past. He needs, yeah, I'd say he needs a bit more to really jump into the C tier for like average play. These two picks I will still never really recommend, albeit they have pretty strong elites curves and scale really nicely into high-low. Like if you are anywhere from master to challenger player, these picks can be some of the solid options. Like if you are very good at piloting them, Nidalee still sees decent amount of competitive play. I think if you are very comfortable with champions, you can still opt into them, get good results. Never picks I'm going to recommend learning, though. I think they are very, very easy traps to fall into, and you need to play like 100 to 200 games to really get good value out of these champions. Nidalee is in the C tier, though I do think Nidalee is a slight tier above Rengar and has some utility in the functionality of her E, which you can just throw into someone, give them attack speed steroid, and kind of enable someone else to do some level of carrying if you ever really fall behind. Rengar doesn't have that level of agency. If you fall behind on Rengar, you will suffer most of the time. Other C tier picks, other likes of Talia, who's really heavily fallen out of the jungle at this point. It's really unfortunate to see. I don't think she's D tier at the moment. I think she can still have value if you're very comfortable playing her. And I'd say she's like an AP tier above the likes of Gragas, but she's definitely not great by any means. This pick does have pretty clear issues, and the nerf towards her jungle modifier not too long ago really hurt her. It put her in a pretty bad spot for the jungle, and I think Talia mid could probably do with a slight tap down, and Talia jungle could do with a slight tap up. And if they were to do that in following patches, I could definitely see Talia once again being a viable jungler, which you can kind of opt into if needed. Qiyana, I think this pick maybe not isn't slept on, but is like definitely kind of underrated to an extent. I think if you're very comfortable playing her, she can be a very valuable champion. We've seen people like Densey perform really well on her, and I think if you are a Qiyana enthusiast, you play a lot of Qiyana mid maybe, you want to play her a bit in the jungle, she could definitely get you results. She is obviously an incredibly hard champion to play, and you need like Rengar and Nidalee level games to really get the most out of this pick. And that kind of incentivizes people away from the champion, and I wouldn't really recommend it for those reasons. But you can definitely get results on her if you've already put a lot of time into playing a champion like Qiyana. Rek'Sai and Sejuani wrap up my C tier. In the case of Sejuani, same issues as Maokai and Skarner, except from why I have kind of done some level of solo queue skew in the past to try and alleviate some of these issues. She's still an incredibly pro-Joe champion. Don't get me wrong, I still think this champion is very, very much far from like these other solo queue tanks like your Amumu's and your Ramesses, for example. But the health ratio change on her W definitely gave her more value in terms of her scaling. She's still not a scaling pick by any means, but you can play out these mid-game scenarios, and she works a bit better with more gold accessible to her, as she does have HP levers within her kit. So that's definitely something to consider. If you're very comfortable playing Sejuani, you're willing to sacrifice some level of individual agency, she can be a fine pick, especially if you're duo queuing with someone. But if you're if you're just queuing by yourself, she's not a champion I'd recommend climbing with at the moment. In case of Rek'Sai, Rek'Sai's definitely been on the rise as of recent. She has, I kind of seen a surge, like, Hecarim in the Youmuu's Ghostblade build. It used to be, obviously, like a build she ran back along. After they removed Prowler's Score, she was playing the Youmuu's variant for a while, and then they reworked her and gave her some health ratios on, I believe, specifically her passive. That did help her. Like, it helped her kind of, like, shift towards these Bruiser builds, but then they nerfed her quite aggressively, like, over the course of the next month, and she kind of faded away because of just, one, because of her top lane skew at the time, and then two, because she was just overperforming the jungle. Right now, though, she's a relatively underperformant jungler. Could probably do with a buff, but the rise in the, like, lethality options do give her some level of individual agency, and I'd say she sits as a high C2 option. You can win games on Rek'Sai. I just think she's a little on the weak side at the moment, and, probably needs a bit more to really jump back up the tier list again. The B tier leads off with Olaf. We've actually seen 2 games of Olaf jungle in competitive this split, which has been cool to see. I think this pick definitely could probably do with a bit more traction to really, like, once again have the same value as he had, like, back along in, like, 2020, 2019, I believe it was, when Olaf jungle was more of a mainstay. Obviously, we're, quite far away from that, but Olaf jungle has been given, like, buffs. They have, the E change he received recently was really nice for him, and they have given him jungle modifiers on the likes of his Q and his E, so I think this pick kind of slept on at the moment. Definitely deserves a B tier spot. If you pick him in the right like scenarios against like heavy CC compositions and low mobility like marksman, this pick is a very solid option, and yeah, definitely warrants a very good placement. Yeah, when you pick him in those right scenarios. In the case of Zed, it's a pilot-driven champion. If you can pilot him well, he can be an incredibly good option. He has one of, if not just outright, the fastest clear speed of any jungler. This pick can be out on the map so quickly, but if you can't execute your combos well and you're like blundering consistently, this champion loses almost all of its value. You have to be very comfortable clearing fast and then using that like tempo advantage to chunk out laners, like execute your combos correctly, look for dives, poach away camps and stuff like that. Those can all be very demanding things which I wouldn't expect like the average player to consistently execute well on, and even like master higher players will still blunder on some of these like things. So definitely, if you want to play a pick like Zed, and I do think he can be a very good pick if you learn him, you have to sink a lot of time into him. You've got to be using that time well to kind of like maximize the value of the champion. Same goes for Zyra. Very similar champion in terms, well, I mean, like AP wise and just needing to be able to clear and then use that tempo advantage like as much as possible. Does have access to two forms of hard CC in the ultimate and the E, and I think can be a bit more forgiving, more of obviously a dot mage than anything. She sits as like a solid B tier option. You need to be getting the clear speed down though. If you clear poorly on Zyra, use for tempo badly, then kind of akin to Zed, she's probably just a pick not worth playing at the moment. Rammus is not great. He's a very low elo skewed champion. He should be he just should be better for what he is at the moment. It's kind of unfortunate, but if you can somehow get access to like 4 or 5 pick within draft, then Rammus can be a champion worth considering. He's very easy to play, doesn't really demand much out of the player, and yeah, I think those are the kind of like spots you'd play Rammus, but they're very niche, and yeah, I think this champion could do with being a bit better at the moment to really encourage him as an option again. Udyr is fine, very like I wouldn't say, yeah, he's not a bad champion by any means. I think if you can pilot Udyr really well, he can still be a very good champion. This pick obviously is for 2 builds in the AD and the like AP Bruiser variant with the Leandries. I think it comes down to what you need within the game and what you're really comfortable playing. He's a pretty demanding champion. If you pilot Udyr badly, you clear badly, and obviously that's goes for a lot of junglers, then this champion does lose a lot of value, but make sure you're rotating your forms correctly. He's a unique champion with the way his ultimate functions. I think you can get good value out of him. I think he sits as a very solid B tier option in his current state. I'd have Eve beneath him. I think Eve is better with her buffs. She's definitely kind of resurfaced as a solid jungle option. You need to be very comfortable playing Eve and snowballing your advantages. If you ever fall behind on Eve, this champion can feel really lackluster to play. You don't really want to play Eve in compositions which have a lot of AP, so she does become a bit more conditional. But if you're very comfortable playing with a champion, I think she can be quite valuable at the moment, and the buffs she's received definitely solidify her as a solid B tier option at the moment. Lee Sin could probably arguably be dropped down to the C tier. He's not performing that well at the moment. He's obviously the most popular jungler in the game, and he's pretty early game skewed. Like if you can like sober your advantages on Lee Sin, this champion could be quite valuable, but you need to be able to execute him correctly. If you execute Lee Sin poorly, this champion does lose a substantial amount of its value. He's a bit more forgiving than he has been in the past, but by no means does that make him the forgiving champion. You need to be able to get ahead, get early advantages, and then take over the game, so that later on into the game you're not useless, or you can close up the game with the like advantages you have. In the case of Graves, he's also not performing that well at the moment. Definitely sits as more like a low B tier option. He's suffered from direct nerfs and nerfs towards some of his itemization, primarily like lethality options being nerfed to a range. He's really struggled with that over time. Yomu's is a weaker item, Opportunity is a weaker item, Umbral Glaive is a weaker item for him, and yeah, he's suffered, and he sits as more like a low B2 option now because of those main like factors. Ivern, the buff he received to his Q was incredibly elite skewed, and it was completely the wrong direction to buff Ivern in. He is still not the most performant low elo champion. Obviously he's going to have less agency, he's an enchanter after all, but I think the direction Riot took him in was the worst possible way, giving champions more CC in a already hard, like like meta where Mark Treads, you really don't want to be picking them up because they're expensive and you can oftentimes find yourself stunting, like stunting your build. If Mark Treads were slightly cheaper, I think it wouldn't matter as much because then people would have access to more tenacity more consistently. But Ivan, yeah, they buffed him in the wrong direction. He is still very reliant on clearing effectively. Like if you clear poorly on Ivan, he is another champion, kind of akin to like your Zeds and Zaras, who needs to be able to use his tempo well. And yeah, I'd say that's like the prohibiting factor of moving the champion up towards like the A and S tier. Plus, he's got low agency. That's just on the basis of being an enchanter, though. Elise is a fine AP assassin, kind of like Eve now. They kind of sit as like B tier options. I think Elise, I mean, is obviously a very early game skewed assassin and requires kind of akin to Eve, very, like predicated on very early game advantages to be useful. But I'd say Eve scales a bit better. At least, yeah, needs to be able to use her hard CC and her like early game base damage kit to kind of snowball advantages and then yeah take over games. In the case of Hecarim, he's really been on the rise as of recently. I'd say he sits as more like a high beta option now. This champion's kind of seen a skew in his builds. He's always had this skew where you can go like a lethality, you can go like a bruiser, and you've even seen like the pickup of like tank itemization like every so often. I think it comes down to what you're really comfortable playing and what you kind of need within the game. I think Hecarim is a champion which requires pretty deep mastery at the moment. He's not like old Hecarim where you could kind of just run over the opponents and just stack check them most of the time. You need to know when you want to dive in. You need to know what fights you can take and where you can have value on the map. Otherwise, you'll really struggle. Make sure you're playing this pick well. And I think he's in a considerably better spot. And he's been like getting better over time. So definitely sits as a high beta option at the moment. Zac sits within my B tier. Honestly, probably a lower beta option now. Zac, as of more recent, hasn't been performing as well. It's kind of unfortunate because I think he's also another champion which is just suffering from Sunfires being bad. I think there's a lot of picks in the game at the moment which could do with Sunfires being buffed and Full Mail being buffed. These two items are definitely in a pretty rough spot at the moment. And Zac, I'd say to an extent, has suffered from that. The other Zac build is obviously the Protobelt build, which is more popular in Korea. And I think it comes down to what you feel comfortable with, what you can take over and feel like you have more agency within games. And I'd say Zac is still a relatively hard tank compared to some of the other tanks to play, so make sure you're piloting him correctly, clearing correctly, and I'd say he sits as like a middle of the pack B tier champion. Shaco, the most recent buffs he's received, helped him. It enabled him to sit as more like a high beta option. AP Shaco is probably already an A tier option at the moment. It is also more low skewed than the AD Shaco, but AD Shaco, if you get an advantage and like take over games early, he can be a very valuable champion. You do just have to take over games early though. If you fall behind, this champion will feel really lackluster and you won't be able to assassinate targets like you need to really get the advantage of this champion. Belveth sits within the B tier. And I'm going to put Kindred next to her because they are relatively similar champions in the way they want to function. They want to just get access to as many items and like poach away as many camps as possible to really get value within the game. I think if you're very comfortable playing these champions, they are very good options which scale really well into elite. These are really good elite picks. Great for taking over solo queue if you are very comfortable piloting them. They are very deserving high B tier champions at the moment. Echo sits within the B tier. The buffs he received to its queue not too long ago helped him in the jungle. And I'd say Echo, if you can get an advantage, Snowball, kind of akin to a lot of the AP junglers, get early Magi stacks, this pick can be very effective. He does a huge amount of damage to jungle camps, especially when you get access to a lot of AP, kind of akin to Diana, but yeah, you need to be able to pilot him well. If you pilot him poorly, this champion will definitely struggle, and you need to be maximizing the amount of damage and like clear speed with the AP you collect on this champion. Vi is a very good, just solid B tier option. If you're looking for someone with point and click CC, a good AD bruiser, I think Vi is a great option there for you at the moment. She is a very good, I'd say, B, like middle of B to high end B, like pack, like within the pack of options. Great, just as like a very generic option, I guess you could say. Kind of like Xin Zhao and your Jalvins, except for she tends to be a bit more elite skewed at the moment than the other two. Whether that's because she's slightly harder to pilot, or whether people can sometimes misuse like the value of this champion, I wouldn't be able to pinpoint it as much, but she doesn't perform quite as well for like the average player as your Xin Zhaos and your Jalvins do, which I'd say are the two go-to options at the moment if you're looking for something very simple to play. Karthus, a great champion if you play him well. I really like Karthus. I think he's in a great spot at the moment, and yeah, clear well on this champion, get access to as much damage as possible. You will snowball and take over games. This champion has one of the most powerful ultimates in the game, and you do absurd amounts of damage. It is a very valuable champion to be playing at the moment. Shyvana, I used to have Shyvana in the A tier, and that was when I'd say the tier list was maybe a bit too low elo skewed. I think since then I've kind of moved the elo skew a bit higher, like a bit more, maybe not like average to above average now, rather than just specifically low elo skew. I think Shyvana definitely suffers the higher up you go. This pick will get invaded. She needs items to be useful within the game. She will lose isolated 1v1s against most champions if she doesn't have access to her ultimate. I think she just has too many weaknesses and vulnerabilities at the moment. That being said, she's still a great low elo option, and because this does encompass to an extent some of the low elo, I think Shyvana can still be a useful champion to play. But once you go like Diamond Plus higher, this pick loses so much value, and it's a champion I'd recommend moving on from pretty quickly. And hopefully, who knows when, she'll get reworked, but right now that doesn't look to be any time soon, which is unfortunate. Teemo sits within the B tier. They buffed him not too long ago, and it helped him. It solidified him as like a solid B tier option. Got similar issues. I say similar issues. He is still a low elo skew champion. He is primarily built around his scaling and getting access to like really powerful shrooms, clearing, and like isolated 1v1s can be quite strong on this champion. He's not quite the A to S tier option he was back along. They have nerfed him a couple of times since, but the buffs he received to his jungler modifier not too long ago solidified him as a solid B tier option. Mordekaiser, pretty underrated champion within the jungle. He's not played that much anymore, but he has very powerful isolated 1v1s. He's a great low elo skew champion and will outduel most of the bruisers in the jungle and will beat most of the tanks. He can suffer against some of the higher mobility options or champions which can just stall him out a bit and kite him out, but I think this pick is in a very solid spot at the moment across both jungle and top lane. So if you're looking for like a flex option, AP, low elo skew champion, then Mordekaiser can be a great pick for you. Trundle sits within the B tier. His vulnerability is just his clear speed and the fact that he's very, very like reliant on being stat checky and needing to like just having a very linear playstyle. People know how to play against Trundle these days. This champion will just run at you, stat check you, lose and die, or win and would just take over the game. There's not much to it. He doesn't have a huge amount of depth. He's a great champion for low elo. That being said, I think playing someone with just a very stat checky playstyle and just understanding your limits of what you can and can't do will catch people out, and you can in river or in like enemy jungle just like press R on someone and then just auto them down. Like that is just the strength of the champion in a lot of situations. Jax and Poppy wrap up the B tier. In the case of Jax, I think he's a great counter pick option. He sits as a solid B tier option. The buffs he received not too long ago did help him to an extent. He still needs a bit more, I'd say, to kind of like bump back up to the A tier, but with Xin Zhao being good at the moment, I'd say he's got a good spot where he can be brought out in. And then Poppy is the other option within the B tier. I think Poppy is also very reliant on being like brought out as a counter pick into high mobility options. If Lee Sin is blinded, you can play Poppy. I think that is one of the spots where she has a lot of value. And the buffs she received to her jungle modifier not too long ago have definitely solidified her as a high B tier option. Let's move on to the A tier event. So Talon is going to lead off the A tier. This pick has really started gaining a lot of traction in high elo. I'd say over the last month, his pick rate has doubled. He was, I mean, already a well-known good high elo jungler, but I think people are beginning to like consider him, if not just outright the best at the moment. This pick definitely does like a huge amount there. Has access to so much damage. Can be really frustrating for most junglers to play against with how easily he can like be mobile around the map. And I think Talon is a great A tier option at the moment. He does perform worse in like average play. That is like definitely going to be one of his vulnerabilities, but if you are going Diamond Plus, you will start running into Talons consistently, and if you are running into Smurfs, then they will oftentimes be playing Talon. I think this champion has definitely solidified himself as a very good A tier option. Gwen sits within the A tier at the moment. This pick got nerfed this patch. It did more for top lane than it did for jungle. Jungle stayed relatively neutral. I think this pick is still very elite skewed. You need to clear well on it. You need to be able to understand the dueling thresholds of this champion. But if you can get your items, you can scale up, you can play your mid game well, I think this pick is still one of the best options in the game. And kind of akin to Talon, one of the better elite skewed picks which you can play within the jungle at the moment. On the flip side, Briar is a great low elo option. Probably, yeah, I mean, she sits as like a low A tier option. I don't think she is the best pick at the moment. I think she has obviously a lot of volatility and not going to have the same level of consistency. I think she's also a relatively deceptively like hard like low elo champion, which is obviously kind of like a weird place to be in. She struggles Diamond Plus, like people understand like the functionality of the champion. But if you are looking for a champion which is great to get to Diamond and you are willing to sink some time into playing Briar, I think she can be a very good option at the moment there for you. Dr. Mundo sits as an A tier option. He has kind of risen up as a solid jungle pick, like as of more recent. This champion obviously has pretty aggressively skewed jungle modifiers on both his Q and his E, and he wasn't ever really picking up traction back along, but more recently, like with like certain builds and like shift arounds of what people have been doing, whether that's like rushing Deadmans or like opting into like a Warmogs, which obviously tends to be more top lane skewed, but if you are playing like Mundo jungle, you can opt into things like Heartsteel and like just stack that item into relatively melee compositions. I think this pick can have good value, and I think he is now a very solid easy to play tank jungler, which can, with the avoiding of like lane, which is like Mundo's biggest weakness, can scale up and be a very powerful champion like at level like 16, 17, 18, where he is very hard to kill, especially with certain compositions. Kha'Zix sits as an A tier option. The buffs he received not too long ago to his passive really helped him. It gave him a lot more damage to work with, and he can more consistently execute his targets. He is probably one of the best like assassin options to go to at the moment if you're just looking for someone decent in average play, but can still function quite nicely in elite at the moment as well. Master Yi, I think he got buffed more recently. I think he got, or I say buffed, I think it got adjusted actually, so I dropped him from the S to the A tier. They like buffed crit Yi, and I think you can every so often opt into it. I don't believe it is the correct build to go in every game. I believe the standard just on hit variation of Yi is still his best performing option. But he's obviously always this frustration point in low elo. If compositions have a poor amount of lockdown, Yi can be a very powerful pick. The higher up you go, the harder it is to pilot this champion. I think Yi is a deceptively hard to play high elo pick. You need to understand your limits. If you don't understand your limits, this champion will feel pretty useless to play. But if you are able to snowball gold and just get as like big of an advantage as you can, even trading 1-for-1 in a lot of situations, this champion can be a monster. He can be very powerful, and I think he's a very solid A tier option to still opt into at the moment. Darius has kind of like been left to rest as like an A tier option now. Obviously, we had the rise and I'd say slight fall of Darius jungle. It got pretty heavily nerfed. They dropped the modifier all the way from 300 to 200%, and then directly nerfed, which was mostly top lane skewed. It didn't have as much of an impact in the jungle. That being said, though, he's definitely a bit weaker now. He sits as more like an A tier option, but if you're very comfortable playing Darius, I still think he can get out good results, and is still, yeah, a good A tier option to play at the moment. Pantheon jungle, doing decently. He has also obviously had, not too long ago, like in the past, he also had the 5% monster damage added onto his Q, because it was like slightly deflated because they didn't want Pantheon jungle to be strong, but they've kind of enabled it to be a thing, because he's not really a flex problem at the moment, especially in competitive. If he was to become a flex problem in competitive, he would probably be nerfed pretty quickly, but right now, he sits as a pretty solid champion across like all the roles he's played in, mid, top, jungle support. He can be played as like a very good flex option. It makes it very hard to like directly counterpick him. And if you're looking for a champion, you can just flex around the map. And yeah, I think Pantheon's great for you at the moment. He's not as consistent as some of the other AD boosters. I think you need to be able to snowball advantages, and also kind of akin to like your Yi, understand your limits, because he doesn't scale quite as well. I think he can scale well with like his point and click CC and his like the invulnerability on his E, but you need to understand like your limits and what compositions you do scale into. Diana sits as an A tier AP option, doing fine. Even after the nerfs, I'd still say kind of like Darius, she is just a fine option to play at the moment. Definitely doing really well in the mid lane at the moment, so that is something to watch. And if you want to play Diana, I'd recommend mid lane as number 1 role, jungle as number 2, but jungle is still decent, so definitely don't like feel dissuaded from playing it. Wukong probably sits towards the lower end of the A tier at the moment. He's kind of lingered as a mid A tier option for a while, but it's definitely not performing as well at the moment. Shifts in the meta combined with direct nerfs he received not too long ago have definitely hurt him, and yeah, he's probably dropped down to like a low A tier option now. That being said, Viego opting into the more crit-orientated build with like your collectors, your shield bows, your ODRs, has definitely kind of enabled him to maintain a spot within the high A tier. If you can get one reset within a team fight, this champion can take over games. I think he's still a great pick to have within your arsenal at the moment, and should be one of the considered go-to jungle options to play in his current state. Fiddlesticks is a A tier option. He's niche and unpopular, and that is to his strengths. People won't understand how to play against Fiddlesticks. He can be a team, like he can be a really big win con within teams though. If you get one good ultimate, this champion can completely turn the tides of games. I think he is pretty slept on as an option, but maybe not even slept on, just considered unpopular, and most people don't really want to be playing a champion like Fiddlesticks. But if you do, he's great. He's still a great A tier option in his current state. Kayn and Volibear wrap up the A tier. I think Kayn, if you opt into the right builds in the right game, can still be a very good champion. Definitely holds his own as like a good A tier pick. Maybe not quite the top of A tier, but as like a mid to high end A tier option. Still a great champion. And then Volibear, the simplicity of his kit combined with the the power of his tower dives, the stat checky nature of the champion, some of the build options you can opt into. I think this pick is a very deserving high A tier option in his current state. Moving up to the S tier then, we are going to lead off with Neferi, who I underrated last patch. I thought the nerfs would be would have like dropped her like slightly further down, like as like an A tier option, but she's still holding her own. She's still a great S tier option, and if you play Neferi, you should still continue to play Neferi at the moment. She might be nerfed in 25.9. I wouldn't be surprised. She's still a pro play staple, but yeah, since it's like an S tier option, again, I underrated her last patch because I thought the nerfs would be slightly greater for her. Yorick drops down from the S plus to the S tier. They gave him a pretty hefty amount of nerfs. But he's still a great option. Like if you play Yorick jungle, he still performs really well. Just not quite like stand out S plus tier now, but still just a good option. The tank options are still going to be your Nunus and your Amumus. In the case of Mumu, he's just one of the easiest tanks to play in the game, and the amount of damage, CC he has access to, his relatively simplistic clear speed. I love this champion. I think he's a great pick for just any new player to opt into, and any like player who's just coming back to the jungle. He's really easy to play. Like there are so many like things like able to promote a Mumu. I think the biggest weakness of the champion is his early game. But even then, it can be deceptively strong in certain spots. Like a Mumu can take fights with certain champions, and especially if he is like 2v2 scenarios, this pick can still do a lot. So don't sleep on this champion. I think he's really good, and I think people underrate him the higher up you go. I think this champion can still be functional into master. I do think the higher up you go, though, he will be more consistently invaded and people will exploit his weaknesses. But yeah, don't sleep on the champion. That being said, Nunu is a better champion for just all ranks. I think Nunu's been good for a while now. He's the kind of champion which Riot could nerf if they wanted to, and people would understand, but isn't in dire need of being nerfed. This pick has, just been cruising along, has both the AP and the tank builds, and both perform relatively well. I think this champion is a great S tier option in his current state. Lilia is my other AP option here. Definitely a bit more elite skewed than the likes of a Mumu, but also kind of like Nunu can work across all the ranks. Wants to be played in compositions where she can kind of kite them out, play around her movement speed. If they have a lack of lockdown, she can be really valuable. The buffs she received and then the pullback nerfs were they shifted around a bit, but she's still a great S tier option. Arguably probably a low S tier option, maybe not quite as high as some of the others here, but still great in the right spots if you play her. I'm going to have Warwick and Nocturne as my number. Okay, I'll leave them out like this. I think since I was number one, but I'll talk about them in order. So Warwick is deceptively strong in the jungle. I think people really, really underrate just how good Warwick jungle is at the moment. If you play him, you probably are finding that he's like getting good results for you. If you don't play him already, give him a try. See if you enjoy the champion and just get a feel for like where his kit really, like the strength within his kit really lies. My recommended like 3 go-to options are still your Jarvans, your Nocturne, and your Xin Zhao. In the case of Jarvan, he is the best like autofill jungle option in my opinion, being able to have access to great lockdown, work on a pretty low amount of income, but having some level of agency is a really nice thing for a champion. He can gank lanes really easily, he clears relatively fine, and there's just a lot of things going for him. He can struggle into certain junglers, and good junglers will punish him in certain spots, but if you're very comfortable playing him, I still think he is a great option to go to at the moment. In the case of Nocturne, this champion is almost always within the S tier. His ultimate is an incredibly powerful ability, and the stat checky nature of the champion just gives him so much value for like average play. And then Xin Zhao, my number one jungler at the moment. He didn't need to be buffed, and he was buffed. And most pro players are playing him at the moment. Like he is, I believe, number one most played jungler at the moment, and I mean that's rightfully so. The champion's relatively easy to play. Obviously there is like depth to Xin Zhao. Like you can get more out of his champion if you do put time into him, but you can just pick up and play him, and you should be able to get decent results with this kind of a champion. So Xin Zhao, my recommended option of the patch. I think he's an incredibly good jungler, very simplistic to like kind of get your head around, and can be really valuable in most spots. But if you are looking for like other options, then yeah, Nocturne, Jarvan, pretty close to threes. Warwick's a bit more spicier as a good option. Mimi's my recommended like easy pick, and Neferi, if you still play her, she is still an incredibly powerful jungle option at the moment. And those are my thoughts. So thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.